All righty, so welcome back. Last week, if you remember, I told the story of Cyrus Lundell and his wife Amelia, both collectors from Texas who worked with the Belizean botanist Percy Gentle in Central America. So this week I thought it would be nice to take a look at Gentle's other collaborator from the University of Michigan, H.H. Bartlett. So we have a number of specimens collected by Bartlett in our collection at UT. This one is from that expedition in 1931 to Guatemala, where he first worked with Percy Gentle. And it's collected at Oaxaca, which, in another interesting connection to our talk last week, is an ancient site of the Maya civilization, this time in northern Guatemala. And it was rediscovered in 1916 by Sylvanus Morley, who was the archaeologist from the Carnegie Institute that we mentioned last week. So kind of a small world. And there were excavations going on at this site from 1926 to 1937. And that is kind of during which the time when Bartlett visited and did his collecting. So the moss is not listed as growing on a pyramid, but it's still a pretty cool, interesting collection site. Here's the specimen. Obviously, there's not a whole lot there, a lot of kind of associated debris. But the species Physidens leptopotis is today a synonym of Physidens elegans, which you can kind of see here. And I did find an interesting article from a study in Ecuador in 2019 that they found this particular species to be associated with urban environments, and they were proposing that it might be less susceptible to pollution than other moss species, which I thought was kind of an interesting side note. H.H. Bartlett was Harley Harris Bartlett, an American botanist, biochemist, anthropologist, and linguist. He was born in 1886 in Anaconda, Montana, which is, I think, a very intriguing name for a town in Montana. Frustratingly, I cannot find out where that name come from. It did say it was named after a mine in that area, but why the mine was named Anaconda, I could not find out. So I was kind of sad about that and still kind of curious. But anyways, when he was 13, the family moved to Indianapolis, Indiana. He attended Shortridge High School, where he studied botany, geology, and chemistry. And he credited the influence of several of his teachers, including Miss McClellan, Miss Marthins, and Miss Selleck, with encouraging him to pursue science. And after graduating, he worked for a couple of years as a teaching assistant in botany and chemistry at the high school. But in 1904, he enrolled in Harvard University. He actually majored in chemistry and didn't have a lot of coursework in botany, but he spent 3 years as an undergraduate assistant at the Gray Herbarium, which was named after the famous American botanist Asa Gray, who started the herbarium. And while he was there, he worked on the genus Juncus and published 10 papers by the time he graduated with his bachelor's in 1908. And unlike several of our collectors that we've talked about, he didn't pursue a higher degree. Instead, he was hired as a chemical biologist at the Bureau of Plant Industry, which is part of the USDA. His department was actually called Drug Plant, Poisonous Plant, Physiological and Fermentation Investigations, which is quite a mouthful. But he was working on plant nutrition, biochemistry, and taxonomy. He published on the genetics of Oenothera, which is a genus of herbaceous flowering plants, commonly called every evening primroses, suncups, and sundrops. And he described 45 new taxa in that genus, and was also studying how genetics control plant pigmentation, which is interesting. So in 1915, he joined the faculty at the University of Michigan. He was made director of the university's botanical gardens in 1919, a full professor in 1921, and head of the botany department in 1922. He taught classes and continued to study plant biochemistry and genetics, and he also began to travel widely in the tropics of Asia and the Americas. So in 1918, Bartlett was sent to Sumatra, which is a large island in Southeast Asia and part of Indonesia. So he did that for the United States Rubber Company, and his work there included selecting, growing, and grafting rubber plants to improve their yields. And while there, he also collected specimens of the local flora in his spare time. So it wasn't part of his job. So he had to kind of use whatever newspaper he could find, and he actually pressed the specimens under the mattress of his bed. He also developed a lifelong interest in the culture and language of the Batak indigenous group there. He got into linguistics and ethnobotany, became fluent in their language. And when he returned to Sumatra in 1927, he was ceremoniously adopted as a younger brother of a hereditary chief. He observed and described their lives and customs and returned to the US with a large collection of photographs and manuscripts. So in the early 1930s, he took collecting trips to Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize, and that's where he worked with Percy Gentle. From 1934 to 35, he was an exchange professor to the University of the Philippines. In 1940, he was working in the Panama Canal Zone, which at that time was an unincorporated territory of the United States, studying interactions between plants and malaria mosquitoes. But then in 1941, he was recruited as a principal botanist for the U.S. Office of Rubber Plant Investigations for the World War II effort. So he transported close to 5,000 plants of this Hevea brasiliensis from the Philippines to Haiti to expand wartime production of rubber in the Haitian countryside. And to put that into context, if you remember, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about DEF Bessie Fitzgerald, who was working with rubber plants in Malaya in Southeast Asia. And at the time, that was the main source of rubber, but it was threatened by and eventually cut off by the Japanese invasion. So the US and the Allied forces were looking for an alternative source of rubber in the tropical Americas. In 1947, he returned to the Philippines as a visiting professor, educational consultant, and special advisor to the president of the University of the Philippines. The following year, he was back in the US, and he became a chairman for the Commission on the Philippines for the National Research Council. He continued to study rubber production and also encouraged the cultivation of guayuli in South America, and that is a woody shrub native to the Chihuahua Desert, which produces a natural rubber and other chemicals. And it's a source of actually a hypoallergenic latex alternative, which is kind of interesting. And then 32 University of Michigan students completed their PhDs under his direction. He was known to his students as Uncle Harley and acted as a special friend to students from abroad. During his career, he published 133 new plant names. He authored 179 publications in almost 40 different journals. They were mostly scientific papers, but also he wrote on ethnographic, ethnobotanical, and linguistic works. He wrote on a wide range of topics, including paleobotany, education, history, and even stamps. His bibliography took up 6 pages, so this is just the first one. One work that caught my eye was this Japanese botany during the period of woodblock printing, and he wrote this with a Japanese co-author. It's described as an essay on the development of natural history, especially botany in Japan, on the influence of early Chinese and Western contacts, on Japanese books and woodblock illustration. And the second part is an exhibition of Japanese books, manuscripts, mostly botanical, held at the Clements Library of the University of Michigan in commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the first treaty between the United States and Japan. And I was able to find just a couple images online from someone selling a copy of it. But it looks like a really interesting kind of mix of art, history, and science, which seems kind of one of his hallmarks. He retired from the University of Michigan in 1956, but continued on as a professor emeritus and director emeritus of the Botanical Gardens. His collection of 60,000 plus herbarium specimens were donated to the university, along with his botanical library, which included many rare early volumes, including some like pre-Linnaean botanical texts. And also his collection of ethnographic materials, including this wooden calendar from Sumatra. And he passed away in 1960 at the age of 73. So during his life, he participated in a number of organizations. He was active in the Botanical Society of America, serving as secretary, vice president, and president. He was president of the Michigan Academy of Science, Arts, and Letters in 1924. Member of the American Philosophical Society from 1929. And in 1955, the Harley Harris Bartlett Exploration Fund was established by the botany department at the University of Michigan to finance students going on botanical field trips. So he's commemorated in the genus Bartlettina and over 70 different plant species names. Specimen-wise, he collected it, largely in Asia, North, Central, and South America. We have over 2,000 specimens in the Brown by portal, 138 in the lichen portal, and over 7,000 vascular specimens in Symbiota. So that is a brief overview of H.H. Bartlett, but again, I'll end with some quotes from his memorial article. So it started saying, the life of Harley H. Bartlett, which came to its conclusion February 21st, 1960, was one of those few in the annals of American botany, which even a book-length biography would be hopelessly inadequate to cover. The extraordinary diversity of his interests, accomplishments, travels, and collections has already given to them a legendary quality. And then ending, they said that the most enduring honor of all is in the lives and hearts of all the hundreds of former students around the world, the nephews who have lost in their Uncle Harley a stimulating teacher, a warm and generous friend, and a genius in many fields whose standards will ever be a goal to maintain. So some very kind words. And yeah, thanks again for listening.